Welcome back to SledgeHammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, today I am joined by the absolutely amazing duo of Juliet and Theresa. How are you ladies doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Doing really good.
Yeah, this is seriously such an honor for me. I'm so glad we were able to connect. I want to say a little bit about you guys before we actually get rolling here. Both are writers and lovers of the horror genre because they're intelligent. Juliet and Theresa both took their daily conversations about horror, gender, and other pressing issues and created their podcast, Attack of the Final Girls. So you guys don't have to go far looking for this podcast or looking for social media links because they're right here in the description. So make sure you're clicking the link in the description. Make sure you're following them on social media. Make sure you're checking the podcast out. Now, before you check it out, let's talk about it a little bit, ladies. What can you tell me about the podcast that I haven't talked about already?
Well, we're as of recording this, we're 10 episodes in. We're so excited to be a part of the horror community. It's been quite an honor to see how well we've been received. We've always been observers of the community, but to start to take part in it has been really, really exciting. And we love the opportunity to talk to people like you, talk to people on Twitter about this genre that we both love so much.
Yeah, we have been horror fans for a really, really long time, and we've been friends for a really long time too. And Juliet's like a podcast pro. she teaches classes on it. Like, she's responsible for a lot of really cool stuff. And we had the idea to do like a travel podcast, and then COVID happened harder than it did in 2020. So eventually we just both kind of fell into this idea that we needed to do a horror podcast. And then right after, we were both like, why didn't we do this like ages ago? It doesn't make any sense. So yeah, so we've been doing it since November of last year. Juliet's, like I said, she's been doing podcasts for a long time. I'm a newbie. So this is my is this my first or my second podcast?
First in recording, but second in release.
Yes. So
don't care. I'm first. I'm going with the first. That's me. I'm first.
So yeah, we just were like, we kind of fell into it, and then we were like, wow, why didn't we do this way sooner? So we're really excited, and we've engaged with people. We've had some really meaningful conversations, and that's basically what we wanted to do, is say, hey, women have space in horror. They're allowed to have their own opinions. They're allowed to talk about it. We were tired of just hearing guys all the time. So we're like, nope, we're staking our claim. We're here. So.
And the great thing about the horror community and the horror genre, and I'm not just saying this as a fan of Attack of the Final Girls or some of the other my wife is a huge part of this podcast. She does everything with me except for the My First Horror Movie. Some of my best friends in the world, Anna, Celise, Kylie, Maya, all these amazing, powerful women in the horror genre. And you could even make the argument that women have always been in the forefront of the horror genre. I mean, for the love of God, you have all the way back in 1968, you got women kicking ass in the horror genre. At a time when women were less empowered, you had the final girl, these women that were coming out and beating the hell out of these men and showing, I can survive, I can outlast you, because even if I can't outpower you, I can outsmart you, I can outdo you, I can outrun you, and I can outsmart you all the way through. So I'm very proud of the horror community and how inclusive the horror community is. The minute that we find out you love horror movies, you come to me, hey, I like Freddy Krueger. I'm like, welcome to primetime, bitch. What's up? What do you want to talk about? So I love the fact that you don't get that divide within the horror community. And the only divides you really get are, do we like this movie or do we not like this movie? But for the most part, the gatekeeping thing is okay. Unless you disagree with me, then you're wrong. But overall, it's been pretty fun. And I'm so glad to know that you guys have been accepted so well and so fast in the community. And when you're good at what you do, people want to listen. And if you guys have it, the link's down here in the description, so you can right now. So we talked about how you guys are both big horror fans. And in order to become a horror fan, that has to start somewhere. So now, ladies, I would like to go back to the past. And I would like to talk about what got you started in the horror genre, your first horror movie. Theresa, I'll start with you. Your first horror movie was?
So I had two. I couldn't pick between the two because I don't remember which one came first, but they happened in the same week, so I think they count. So my first week, I saw two horror movies that both impacted the hell out of me. And they were the 1999 version of House on Haunted Hill and the Exorcist. Both of those same week.
Wow. You said that the remake of House on Haunted Hill, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Still a great movie. Nobody's gonna poo-poo with that. And The Exorcist, holy shit. Real quick, Juliet, before we get to your first horror movie, I got to tell you, for people that are repeat viewers of the podcast know this, I grew up in a video store. My parents owned a video store, and they were young. I had very, very young parents, and so they were, the cool parents, and they would watch horror movies with me. And I will tell you this right now as a straight up fact. It's the only movie my mom ever shut off. Like, no, you're not watching this. And we'll talk about the scene here shortly, but there's a certain scene that happened and my mom was like, nope, we're done. This isn't happening. So before we dive too deep into that, Juliet, let me bounce over to you. What your first horror movie?
Well, funny enough, you were talking about your mom, and I watched my first horror movie with my mom, and it's the original OG Dracula.
Yep. And again, I pimp this every time I get the chance to talk about it. This is one of the best box sets you could ever hope to own if you're a fan of horror. A lot of the villains that we have today would never exist were it not for our Universal guys and gals right here. So one of my favorite sets that I own. I think the Universal monsters are such an important part of horror history. And obviously for you, they're a super huge part of your horror history. So, Julia, I'll start with you this time. How old were you the first time you had seen this?
So I was pretty young, I think maybe 4 or 5. My mom started me really young, getting the VHS tapes from the library. I joke that I was genetically predisposed to like vampires. And I think that from a young age, my mom kind of knew that, like her, I would be into kind of the scary stuff. So she started me on stuff that we could work with and went from there.
Well, she just sounds like a swell lady.
She is. She's super cool.
That's awesome. So Dracula obviously is something that has been mimicked and repeated throughout history. So obviously, it's a huge part of my life as well, being a huge Universal Monsters fan. But between the two movies of House on Haunted Hill and The Exorcist, wow. Wow. So this question is directed towards you. I want to know, do you remember who you were with the first time that you had seen The Exorcist? Was it at the same sitting, or was it, you said the same week, but was it in the same sitting or spread out?
It was spread out. I was actually with my babysitter. So I had a babysitter that I would have been 9, like going on 10. And I had a babysitter, and she would go to the video rental store and just rent a bunch of movies. Well, there were a lot of kids at this babysitter. So I'm talking like 20 kids that she was babysitting all at the same time. So cool. we would commandeer her VHS, and she would never know that we would play these. So all in the same week, they rented The Exorcist and they rented House on Haunted Hill, which had just come out on VHS. So it was just me and a bunch of other kids at my babysitter's house. She's nowhere to be found. I have no idea where she was. Just letting us while out in her playroom. And I watched them. I can't remember which one came first, but Juliet has fond memories of watching Dracula with her mom. I needed therapy after watching The Exorcist and House on Haunted Hill in the same week. So
sure. Well, I mean, and it's funny because The Exorcist is a film that, and again, we you guys talk on gender lines a lot. I don't mean this as an insult to man or woman, but as a young, 9-year-old young lady that is in the point of just discovering who she is and her body and everything, I'm sure that The Exorcist affects a young lady more than it does a young man at that age. Just like now, another thing I talk about with The Exorcist a lot is Kenny Sledge watching The Exorcist as a young boy compared to Ken Sledge, the father of 2 daughters. The way I feel about this film is completely different, and the reasons I'm scared are completely different. Now, like I said, as a young lady, there's a scene that I won't be able to put over top while we're talking about it, just on morals alone. But I just thought she was stabbing herself. and we obviously know how much the scene impacted you, as any woman it should. This is a scene that I didn't know what was happening, and my mom was like, "Yeah, this is too much. We're done with this shit. This is a wrap." But as a young lady that, like I said, your body more than a young Kenny Sledge would have known. I didn't know anything. I was like, yeah, I don't know what the hell, she's stabbing herself, Mom. Freddie does this shit all the time. You don't ever worry about it. But how impactful was that scene to you as a young lady?
Well, it opened up discussions with my parents about some really sensitive topics. Obviously, I also just thought she was stabbing herself, and there were times when, some of the older kids were like, "Oh, ha ha ha!" Like, "Oh, she's stabbing herself in the vagina." I'm like, "Wait, what? What's happening?" I didn't know what was happening, so I asked my mom, "Why is it so bad that she's stabbing herself in the vagina?" And then, first of all, my mom's like, "What are you talking about stabbing yourself in the vagina for?" Yeah. Number one. Number two, at the time, I didn't know what puberty was. It was too soon. My parents thought to talk to me about such a thing. So now watching the movie, obviously, I'm like, wow, this takes a whole extra layer, with discovering puberty, sexuality when it comes to kind of blossoming into a young woman. Well, then I was just like, I don't get it. So, of course, there were some tense conversations with my babysitter and also with myself after that movie.
I can only imagine what I would do if my daughter came and was like, "Dad, why can't I stab myself in the vagina?" You do what now? You do what? I can only imagine. Like, me and that babysitter would have a sit down, and wouldn't be pretty. So, yeah. We know which scene affected you the most, but I want to bounce back to Dracula now, because it's a love story. I mean, it really is, to the heart of the core. Vampires have always been very romantic, and that's one thing I love about the vampire genre of film. Even before the shiny ones, it was always very romantic and very loving and full of, passion and, romance. Which scene was it from Dracula that affected you the most?
Well, funny enough, when I think about it, it's actually not one of Dracula's scenes. It's one of Renfield's scenes, which is his monologue about rats. That performance, you can't go wrong with Dwight Fry. Like, yeah. What an amazing actor. And just the intensity with which he delivers that speech, it sticks with you. And it's one of the things that my mom and I would then quote to each other, just rats. I mean, we still do it. I mentioned to her that I was coming on here, and we did it to each other, just rats, which is so cool. But you start to think about the character of Renfield, again, as an older person, beyond just, oh, he was Dracula's victim and he kind of went crazy. And you start to think about, well, what is that fate truly? Because Renfield is kind of in between. He is not the desired. He is not the woman who is to be the bride and is to be fully transformed. He's enslaved and he is driven to madness. And there's a lot to say about mental illness there. So that character just becomes more and more fascinating to me with every watch. But he was the one right away that just, oh, this guy is so interesting.
Wait, you mean they were talking about subtly mental health back then? The movies were woke back then. Get right out of town. Like that, I'm sorry, that's just something that drives me nuts when people talk about how I won't watch Candyman 2021 because it's woke. You obviously haven't seen the original, or Dracula, or Night of the Living Dead, or Tales from the Hood, because horror has had a way of infusing a great message all along. It doesn't matter about Twitter or Instagram or how orange the president is. Woke has always been a part of horror. And if you want to say, oh, you're woke because I acknowledge other people's suffering and I want to have equality for everybody, sure, I'm woke. I don't give a shit. I think I know what's right and wrong. And they knew it back then. Address mental health or you'll start sucking blood. So I did. Theresa, I want to bounce back to you here for a second. Now, this is going to be a very hard question when it comes to The Exorcist and House on Haunted Hill. But I always ask, what is your favorite scene from the film? So between the two, what would you say your favorite scene is from House on Haunted Hill or The Exorcist?
Well, it's going to be hands down The Exorcist, the crab walk down the stairs. That is something that, although not the scariest or most, maybe not the most scary now, like as an adult, like it's pretty physically scary, but there are a lot of other like kind of more high level things that are way more scary in The Exorcist. But anytime I hear like feet coming down the hallway and I don't know what it is, it always makes me think of the crab walk. And I'm always like, oh shit. Like even now, like footsteps on the stairs or fast steps on a staircase still freak me out, even to this day. So that's my favorite. That's the scariest. That's like the thing that is still with me even now.
Right. I can picture Theresa laying in her bed at night and someone going down the stairs and she's like, Reagan, enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have a dog, and anytime he's not a big dog but for some reason, when he comes down the stairs, he sounds like a whole human. I don't know what it is, but anytime he goes down the stairs at night, it's like, that's the thing that will have me sit right up in bed. So yeah, right. It definitely has stuck with me.
It's amazing how these scenes can be so impactful. And like I said, as a kid, I thought The Exorcist was terrifying. And now as a grown man, that's a father of not just two young ladies, but I have a son as well. The scene that gets me so bad in The Exorcist is when they're doing the actual exorcism and you're wondering, is this just Pazuzu or is Reagan still in there? And you see "help me" come across the stomach. So this young lady is in there suffering and she's scared and she needs the help. And that scene paralyzes me when I watched it, because as a parent, like, what I will just, please, what can I do? Take me, I'll take his place in a heartbeat. Just do whatever you got. Do it to me. Actually, I'm lying. This really happened. I'm like, go ahead and take her. She tastes better. But and a question I have for you, Juliet, I ask this on every episode, and this I feel is the perfect movie to ask this about. It's happened a couple times, but I feel like we kind of have a Universal monster resurgence, so to speak, right now, because we got The Invisible Man, and Leigh Whannell did great taking that and making it his own vision. And then we had, the name of the movie's escaped me right now, but it was really based around the creature of the Black Lagoon.
Shape of Water?
Oh, yes, Shape of Water. I really felt like that was a love letter to the creature from the Black Lagoon, who was my favorite of the Universal monsters personally. But right now, today, would you like to see Dracula remade, and not so much modernized, but have someone like a Leigh Whannell, put their own spin on the Dracula story? Is that something you'd like to see done today?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The Dracula story and vampire lore in and of itself lends itself to being transformed into so many different eras, so many different places, so many different types of relationships. We talk about it being a love story. It can be a love story between a man and a woman. It can be a queer love story. It can be so many different things. I'm always up for more vampire lore. And I'm always up for specifically the Dracula legend. We've seen it done several times. We had Bram Stoker's Dracula. We had Dracula Untold, which looked at more of the Vlad the Impaler legend. But yeah, I think some of the brilliant minds working in horror right now could definitely make their mark on that story.
I could just imagine a Flanagan Dracula like that.
Oh, man.
But wait a minute. Did you say a queer Dracula? Are we getting woke again? That is up to here with your wokeness, young lady. But you're right. I mean, like, you could do, just like you said with the original, like, there's always that undertone of, with Dracula, it's love, and it's longing, and it's wanting to just, the desire to be alive and to have that compatibility. And God, I wish society would just think of it that way. Now, Juliet, you're lucky here because you're going to get to cheat. Theresa, okay. Not so lucky, because now I have a question for both of you. And Theresa, since it's your turn, you got to go first. We talked about your guys' first horror movies and how they affected you. But now I want to throw a curveball at you. My little buddy Ghostface here has a question for you. What's your favorite scary movie, ladies? What is your favorite horror movie of all time? And Theresa, I'll start with you.
We've talked about this on the podcast before, and we're always like, don't ask us a question because it changes all the time. But yeah, it's one of those things where, like, you might have like a top 5, top 10, but any day of the week, it could be something different where, like, I rediscover a movie and I'm just like, oh my God, I forgot about how amazing this movie is, or I'm connecting to it in a different way that I didn't connect to it in before. Maybe I've had some experiences since the last time I've seen it. But if I'm allowed to go in the horror comedy realm, I'm going to say a movie that I cannot stop laughing at anytime I watch it, What We Do in the Shadows. I'm just going to say that's my favorite because that's a movie that I can watch 1,000 times. I still laugh my butt off. I think it's hysterical. I think it's a hilarious kind of breath of fresh air into vampire lore. It inspired a great television show. I'm actually wearing a What We Do in the Shadows shirt right now, so shilling for them right now. But yeah, like that's a movie I could watch 1,000 times and still laugh every single time.
Sure. And I can't go wrong there. But that's why I don't tell anyone I'm going to ask them that question, because I do want to answer right off the seat of your pants. I don't want you to have time to prepare for it like cheater Juliet did. Juliet, what is your favorite horror movie?
Well, I will give the same kind of preface that Theresa did. It does change based on my mood, based on what I'm watching again, based on what I'm rediscovering. But I think I'm going to pick for our purposes one that we just covered, actually, Day of the Dead, 1985, George Romero. I am a huge George Romero fan. I love his movies, the zombie movies very specifically. My partner and I have made many a pilgrimage to Evans City Cemetery and the Monroeville Mall. Day of the Dead is one that I think gets overshadowed sometimes. Night and Dawn are both brilliant, but Day of the Dead is something really, really special. You see, as with, the sort of seminal three, a strong woman lead character, but the themes of sort of extended isolation, group dynamics, the darkness, and the really kind of dire situation that we see in Day of the Dead just continues to affect me. Every time I watch it, I see or appreciate something new.
Yeah. And like you said, the original trilogy of the Living Dead or of the Dead is just so fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I could watch that trilogy once a week and discover something new that I'm completely in love with. And I did like the Night and the Dawn remake as well. I thought they were both done very well. There were certain, if I wanted to pick apart certain things, there's definitely certain aspects I wasn't a huge fan of. But I do think that Of the Dead is probably one of the best trilogies of all time. I think hands down that there's one where there isn't a weak spot. Like you get like the original Back to the Future trilogy. Like for me, 3 is a huge weak spot in that trilogy. And you get these other trilogies and you always have that one really, really weak entry, or they expand on it. Star Wars, Indiana Jones, they always expand on these trilogies. And obviously they did with Of the Dead too. But that original trilogy, especially for being in the horror world, I think is just so perfect and so amazing. And each one, while they're all the same with the zombie topics, they're all so different in what their message truly is and what they're trying. Oh, fuck, I'm woke again. They are so good. Those movies are so damn good. And they do something for me every time I watch them. And Mr. Romero, God rest his soul, he was such an innovative human being and such a genius. And horror, I feel very comfortable in saying horror would not be what it is today without Mr. Romero and the influence that he had. I mean, you look at even just as recently as The Walking Dead, how huge The Walking Dead got. It took over the world for 5, 6, 7 years. It was all anybody talked about. And one of my favorite horror movies of all time, Shaun of the Dead, which I will go on record and I will fight anybody that wants to tell me that's a spoof movie. It is not a spoof movie. It has a spoof title, but listen, that's an original movie with great characters, great arcs. It'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry, it'll scare you. I'll fight you to the end. Shaun of the Dead is a true horror movie. Okay, I love that movie. But ladies, I've had such an amazing time here with you, and it's unbelievable to me that you've only done as many episodes as you have, because you're both so well spoken and so easy to talk to and so crisp with your answers. But we are coming to the end of the third act, so I got one last question for you both. And Theresa, you'll get to be the cheater this time, because I'm going to ask you both the same question. Juliet, we're going to go back to Dracula. And what we're going to do now is we're going to rank this on a skull count. Now, we're not being critics. We're not judging it on production or quotability or anything of the sorts. What we're doing is ranking it strictly on how much it affected you on your first viewing. So 0 skulls, not effective. 5, very effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. What would your ranking of Dracula be?
Oh my gosh. 4.5. It set me up for loving scary things and sort of finding safe ways to engage with scary things, even as a young person. It set me up for loving the darkness of romance, theatricality, and for starting to think a little deeper about characters from a very early age.
Mm-hmm. Great choice. And like I said, I could never rank a movie as a 5 skull or 5 star on production, as being a critic. I couldn't do it because there's no such thing as the perfect movie, with the exception of Pee-wee's Big Adventure. But in the horror genre, there's no such thing as the perfect movie. But when it comes to how things affected me, I'll give House a 5 all day. That was my first horror movie. That still to this day is my absolute favorite horror movie. So now we're going to bounce back over to you. Now, we are going to go on 2 different skulls here. You're beheading 2 people. You're ahead of the game here because we got Exorcist and House on Haunted Hill. So first off, let's start with the House. What would you say 0 to 5 your ranking of House on Haunted Hill would be?
I'm going to say 3.5. So there are overall, since I've watched it multiple times, what really sticks with me is just a couple of scenes from that movie, specifically the beginning. Some of the effects were really very disturbing to me as a child because I had never seen them. More specifically, like the shaky head thing where they shake their heads really fast and it's blurry. That freaked me out a lot. So the very beginning of the movie and then a couple of the effects. But overall, the movie wasn't really scary when I rewatched it. So 3.5.
All right. Well, now we're going to dive in. How many cans of pea soup are you going to give The Exorcist?
5, no question. Can't even take a second to answer that. It's 5. I crawled into my parents' room and slept at the foot of their bed for about 6 months after watching that because I was convinced that Reagan was in my closet. It's 5 all day long.
I crawled in my mom's bed. My head did a 360 and I stayed there for 6 months.
Yes, exactly.
So again, ladies, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking time out of your day to come and talk horror with me. This has been so awesome. And since we are at the 3rd act and the credits are about to roll, before they do, you got some links down here in the description that need a clicking. So make sure you're checking them out on social media. Make sure you're checking out the podcast. Subscribe to the podcast, not for me, not for them, but for you, to help with your education on the horror world and gender equality, everything in the middle. These are the ladies for you. So ladies, please don't go anywhere. I have a couple more questions for you. Everybody else, as always, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.